You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. A young Filipino woman left home with hope, seeking a better life abroad. But far from her family, something went terribly wrong. Silence, fear, then tragedy. What secrets hide behind closed doors in a foreign land? This is the haunting story of Daisy Villavende, a life stolen in the shadows. Chapter 1. Daisy Villavende. From humble beginnings to overseas hope. Daisy Villavende was born and raised in Narala, South Cotabato, a province in the southern Philippines known for its rural communities and agricultural livelihood. She came from a modest family with limited financial resources. As the youngest of 5 siblings, Daisy grew up in a tight-knit family where education and hard work were highly valued, but economic opportunities were scarce. Like millions of Filipinos before her, Daisy saw overseas employment as a path to a better future. In early 2019, after securing the necessary documents and completing the mandatory pre-departure orientation seminars, she was deployed to Kuwait through an accredited recruitment agency. The Philippine government had recently lifted a deployment ban on Kuwait following a labor agreement that aimed to protect OFWs working there, especially domestic helpers. This agreement was intended to address previous abuses, improve working conditions, and guarantee workers' rights. Daisy's contract specified a monthly salary and work duties typical of domestic helpers, household cleaning, cooking, and caring for children. She was placed with a Kuwaiti family in Sabah al-Salam, a residential area in Kuwait City. Initially, her family heard positive reports. Daisy was determined to send money home and support her loved ones. However, the realities she would face abroad would soon shatter those hopes. Chapter 2. Early signs of trouble and family's growing concern. Within months of her arrival, Daisy's communication with her family became infrequent and cryptic. Where she once sent regular messages, she gradually withdrew, offering vague updates. Her last known communication, a heartbreaking message to her father, expressed her desperation. "Pa, gusto kayo na umuwi. Dad, I want to come home." Daisy's family tried to reach out to the recruitment agency and the Philippine Overseas Labor Office in Kuwait, seeking assistance in locating her and ensuring her welfare. The agency, however, was slow to respond or provide clear information. This delay would later become a point of investigation. Meanwhile, Daisy's employer reportedly restricted her access to communication devices and confined her movements, consistent with reports of domestic worker abuse in the Gulf region. It was common for abusive employers to confiscate phones or monitor calls to prevent workers from reaching out. Back in the Philippines, the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration was alerted by Daisy's family, but had limited ability to intervene remotely. The Department of Foreign Affairs also coordinated with Kuwaiti authorities, but the bureaucracy and legal barriers made timely action difficult. By December 2019, Daisy was completely out of contact. Her family's repeated requests for updates met with silence, until the Philippine Embassy in Kuwait contacted them with devastating news. Chapter 3. The Tragic Death and Autopsy Findings. On December 28, 2019, Kuwaiti authorities informed the Philippine Embassy that Daisy Villavende had died in Kuwait. The official Kuwaiti cause of death was listed as acute heart and respiratory failure, a medical term often used when the exact cause is unclear or linked to trauma. Daisy's remains were repatriated to the Philippines in January 2020. Given the suspicious circumstances, the National Bureau of Investigation conducted a thorough forensic autopsy. The autopsy revealed a gruesome picture. Daisy had sustained multiple injuries indicative of severe physical abuse. Findings included multiple contusions and bruises all over her body, particularly on the chest, back, and limbs. Fractured ribs and internal bleeding consistent with blunt force trauma. Signs of sexual assault and trauma to the genital area. Evidence that the abuse had occurred repeatedly over time, not a single incident. Possible signs of malnutrition and neglect. The pathologist concluded that Daisy's death was caused by blunt force injuries, leading to internal hemorrhaging and respiratory failure. This contradicted the initial Kuwaiti report and pointed to prolonged torture rather than natural causes. These findings shocked the public in the Philippines and intensified demands for justice and protection for OFWs. Chapter 4. Investigation, arrest, and charges in Kuwait. Following the autopsy results and diplomatic pressure, Kuwaiti authorities launched a formal criminal investigation. The primary suspects were Daisy's employer, a Kuwaiti woman in her late 40s, and her husband. Investigations uncovered testimonies from neighbors and domestic workers who reported hearing screams and disturbances in the household where Daisy was employed. There were allegations that the employer was extremely jealous and controlling, often accusing Daisy of inappropriate behavior and punishing her severely. In early 2020, both employers were arrested. The female employer faced charges of intentional murder, while her husband was charged with complicity and failure to report the crime. The Kuwaiti legal system, while having provisions to protect workers, was criticized for its slow and often opaque handling of such cases. Nonetheless, the case was expedited due to diplomatic pressure from the Philippine government and the public outcry. The prosecution presented forensic evidence from the autopsy, eyewitness accounts, and the employer's inconsistent statements. Defense lawyers argued that Daisy died of natural causes and that any injuries were accidental or exaggerated. Chapter 5. Philippine government's response and deployment ban. In the wake of Daisy's death, the Philippine government took decisive action. Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello III announced a total ban on the deployment of Filipino workers to Kuwait, suspending the issuance of work permits and travel clearances until the Kuwaiti government guaranteed protection and justice. This was the second major deployment ban on Kuwait after the 2018 death of OFW Joanna Damopoulos, which had already strained bilateral relations. The deployment ban not only aimed to pressure Kuwait, but also to protect thousands of Filipino domestic workers still employed there. The Department of Foreign Affairs enhanced its monitoring mechanisms, increased consular presence, and pledged to expedite repatriation for distressed workers. The Philippine Overseas Labor Office coordinated with Kuwaiti agencies to ensure compliance with the 2018 labor agreement, which included provisions such as workers' right to keep their passports and mobile phones, prohibition of forced labor and physical abuse, clear working hours and days off, legal recourse for abused workers. However, enforcement remained difficult. Recruitment agencies, which acted as middlemen, were scrutinized for failing to properly screen employers and monitor worker welfare. There were calls for stricter regulation and criminal liability for negligent agencies. Chapter 6. The Court Verdict and Sentencing. In December 2020, after months of trial, the Kuwaiti Criminal Court convicted Daisy Villavende's female employer of intentional murder. The court sentenced her to death by hanging, a sentence reserved for the gravest offenses under Kuwaiti law. The husband was sentenced to 4 years in prison for neglecting his duty to report the crime and failing to prevent the abuse. The verdict was widely covered in Philippine media and praised by OFW advocacy groups as a rare instance of justice in a region where many abuse cases go unpunished. The execution of the sentence, however, required further legal processes and appeals under Kuwaiti law, which meant that actual enforcement could take years. The Philippine government welcomed the verdict but reiterated that justice was only a first step. They emphasized the need for systemic reforms to prevent future tragedies. Chapter 7: Broader Implications, Psychological Insights, and Lessons Learned. Daisy Villavende's case is a tragic illustration of the vulnerabilities faced by overseas domestic workers, particularly under the Gulf's kafala system. This sponsorship system ties the workers' legal status to their employer, restricting their freedom to change jobs or leave the country without consent. It creates a power imbalance that facilitates exploitation. Psychologically, abusers in such cases often exhibit controlling and sadistic behaviors, compounded by cultural factors and social isolation. The employer's jealousy and perceived entitlement led to escalating violence. The workers' isolation, limited access to support, and fear of retaliation trapped Daisy in a cycle of abuse. The failure of monitoring mechanisms, recruitment agencies, and embassies highlights the systemic gaps. Daisy's case underscores the urgent need for strengthening legal protections for migrant workers, enhancing consular and labor-attached outreach, reforming recruitment and deployment processes, raising public awareness about migrant workers' rights. Since Daisy's death, advocacy groups in the Philippines and internationally have pushed for the abolition or reform of the kafala system, improved bilateral agreements, and better enforcement. Her story remains a somber reminder of the human cost behind remittance economies and the ongoing fight to safeguard migrant workers from abuse and injustice. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, may your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.